Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 31st of July 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robertson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're joined by Alex Thompson. Hopefully, yes. A few slight communications problems, but Alex should be joining us from the Netherlands.
Well, we'll just briefly mention the fact that Boris is still on the road. The grand tour of the country continues. He's in Belfast at the moment, where he says he's trying to get the Northern Irish government, devolved government, back on track. He said that perhaps they might discuss a little bit of how much money can be given to them once again, because the 2-year deal for the £1 billion is over, and if he wants their continued support, then maybe he has to send them a little bit more cash. But we'll see what happens to that. In the meantime, Liz Truss has been meeting the Trade Secretary of the United States, or the US ambassador, to talk about trade. She, of course, is the Trade Secretary, and this is all about securing new free trade deals. First, stop the US. I have to admit, the first time I read that, Brian, I wasn't sure whether she meant first stop the US or first she's got to stop the US. But anyway,
she's going to send a rocket,
possibly, because that's the little icon there. But anyway, establishing new free ports across the UK and attracting investment, and getting British business ready to trade by the 31st of October. So she began by meeting the US Trade Secretary. We mentioned this on Friday with David, Alex, but Liz Truss, I do wonder whether she is the best choice for International Trade Secretary.
Well, Mike, in my mind, she will forever be associated with the put down that she got on Question Time once when Peter Hitchens was on the panel with her. And she gave this paean to "Our best days are ahead of us. I believe in our glorious future," and all the usual empty guff. And then Mr. Hitchens said, "Do you believe in anything? You used to be a Liberal Democrat, didn't you?" That did not go down so well, but that's the measure of the woman. And then, of course, she was the British government's supposed expert minister on common law, which was a total shambles. So we can't expect very much from the lady, no.
No, I think everything she touches, yes.
She's in a blue dress now, so everything's going to change.
What's next, Brian?
Boris has been very shy. We're very grateful to the person who flagged up this story from Nation Cymru. Basically, Wales media barred from asking Boris Johnson questions on camera. This is just a fascinating little story. I encourage people to go to the website and read the article themselves. Journalists from ITV, BBC Wales, Heart Wales and the South West Argus complained that they were only allowed to ask questions without recording the answers for TV or radio. They also cooped up in a tin shed and not allowed to accompany the Prime Minister on a tour of a farm at St Bride's, Went Luge near Newport. The newly appointed PM was visiting Wales for the first time since securing the top job. Now, the article is worth looking at because it's got some very good quotes. One of them here from Felicity Evans, BBC Wales political editor, credit where it's due. On Boris Johnson's first visit to Wales as PM, BBC Wales News and ITV Wales are refused the opportunity to ask him, quote, a single question on camera. And we've got another one here from Adrian Masters, ITV Wales political editor. For the record then, on the Prime Minister's first visit to Wales, the national news outlets of Wales, BBC Wales and Wales Online weren't allowed interviews. We were offered the chance to ask questions, but not to film them. Now, we were fascinated by this little story. What was the thing to do? Well, of course, it was to phone the Conservative Party for some comment, which I thought would be quite easy. So we duly got through to CCHQ press office. Here they are with their wonderful little logo, meaningless logo. And the response was, you'll have to phone number 10. But has the Tory party itself got a comment on, you'll have to phone number 10, you'll have to phone number 10. It was literally speaking to a parrot, and they were not going to give any opinion from the party. We had to phone number 10, excuse me. So we took the opportunity to phone number 10, where this little conversation took place. It's not true. To which we said, are you saying that the journalists are lying? It's not true. were the journalists prevented from asking and filming questions? They were given a pooled recording. Were they allowed to ask questions? It's not true.
Click.
Clunk, the phone went down. So who were we speaking to? Well, we're not too sure because nobody likes to give us a name these days, but I thought you would be interesting to see the gals at number 10. So the lead lady, I don't think I was speaking to her, but the lead lady is apparently Jane Higgs, Chief Press Officer. We're intrigued to see that she's got a BA in Political Science and Government and started her career with an internship at Walt Disney Studios.
The Walt Disney Studios?
Yeah, which is obviously where you need to be.
Yes.
But there's so many of them, it's difficult to know who really you're talking to. But they really didn't like the question and they wouldn't answer it. So the truth of the matter is that the journalists were prevented from asking Boris questions on camera. They had to make do with a little recorded piece of 6 questions, which was handed out to all of them. So Boris Johnson, very shy of the press for some reason. But before we end on the gals, this one caught my eye, Katie Smith, and it's just fascinating to see what she's been doing. So she jumped from Bloomsbury Publishing PLC to a policy advisor at HM Treasury. How'd you do that? Magic. So if people want to go and check this out for themselves, you then hop from policy advisor HM Treasury to press officer to the economic secretary HM Treasury. So that's not a bad progression, and then you're in the Prime Minister's office, presumably talking to people like me who've got a simple question. So check it out for yourselves. And I have to get this in because I missed it last week. I don't know whether Common Purpose has been in training any of them, but here's Common Purpose saying that Deutsche Bank is just one of the many organisations that have been crucial to Common Purpose's growth over the years. And of course, here's a recent headline: Deutsche Bank is exposed to $49 trillion in derivatives and is melting down right in front of your eyes.
Absolutely.
So a combination maybe of the gals and Common Purpose with a bit of Deutsche Bank.
Yes. Now, on Monday, we mentioned the 5-country ministerial. This meeting is now concluded. It was a 2-day event, and they have committed to work together on what they're describing as emerging threats. So this was a 2-day summit known as the 5-country ministerial. Home Affairs, Interior, Security and Immigration Ministers of the Five Eyes countries discussing current and emerging threats which could undermine national and global security. So here they are. Wonderful, Priti Patel in the centre there. Well, they're saying that tech companies need to prioritise the protection of users and the wider public when designing services. The UK has warned, and senior ministers from the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and the United States have reaffirmed their commitment to work together with industry to tackle a range of security threats, including the sexual abuse and exploitation of children online. Well, we'll have a look at the end when we look at what they've agreed to do to see how important that particular issue is for them. But anyway, here's what Priti Patel had to say. The Five Eyes are united that tech firms should not develop their systems and services, including end-to-end encryption, in ways that empower criminals to put vulnerable people at risk. We heard today of the devastating and lifelong impact of child sexual exploitation and abuse, and agreed firm commitments to collaborate to get ahead of this threat, because they've been collaborating to get ahead of that threat for so many years now, Brian. They've built such a track record of it. But anyway, she went on to say, as governments, protecting our citizens is our top priority, which is why, through the unique and binding partnership of Five Eyes, we will tackle these emerging threats together. This is sterling stuff. The US Attorney General William Barr was there as well, of course, and as we mentioned on Monday, he has a really big thing about encryption at the moment, so he had this to say: encryption presents a unique challenge. We must ensure we do not stand by as advances in technology create spaces where criminal activity of the most heinous kind can go undetected and unpunished. And so he, before he came to this meeting, as we mentioned on Monday, has basically told the tech companies if they don't start including backdoors in their encryption mechanisms, that the US government is going to legislate to force them to do so. So he went on to say, indeed, making our virtual world more secure should not come at the expense of making us more vulnerable in the real world. We are grateful for the leadership of Home Secretary Patel in facilitating these critical discussions and shared commitments to safety for all. So let's just have a look and see what they actually agreed here. To continue to develop and share learning on cyber threats to improve the collective response. The importance that supply chains in the 5G network should be trusted and reliable to protect it from unauthorized access or interference. To create a stronger approach to the misuse of drones, because that's all about encryption and it's also about child sexual abuse, isn't it? With the UK hosting an event next year to enhance cooperation in that area. And then to explore enhancing cross-border information sharing and to maintain efforts to combat foreign interference in elections. They keep banging this tired old drum. Well, as we'll come on to a little later, I don't think they're really going to combat foreign interference in elections. But Alex, this is really your area. Let me bring you into the program again at this point here and say, what do you make of this charade?
Well, charade it is, of course, Mike, because the what we're talking about here is not the signals intelligence side of the house, and this is something that the Anglo-Saxon countries uniquely do by bringing it together with signals intelligence. We're talking here about what's variously called information assurance or cryptography. It's not the classic signals intelligence, and so the 5 Eyes, which is a bit of a slogan, doesn't apply here, or rather it's in question whether it does, because we're on the borderline between passive signals intelligence and information assurance. Now, the problem with it, even if you approach it as pure signals intelligence, is that at least for Attorney General Barr's remit in the United States, it is unconstitutional. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution spells that out in the 10 First Amendments, which collectively are the Bill of Rights, taken from England's Bill of Rights of the same name. The Fourth Amendment states the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing, meaning specifically describing, the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Various whistleblowers like Bill Binney, quite senior in NSA's technical structure until he left in October 2001, have pointed out that there is no way to square that circle. You cannot have a constitutional compliant approach to mass surveillance. And forcing encryption cracking at source is nothing other than making people surveillable by default and hoovering up their data by default in the way that NSA and GCHQ now have a share of the global traffic passing through their pipelines. There's no way to make that lawful. It's express in the United States Constitution, and it is at least implicit in the constitution of the other 4 Five Eyes countries.
I mean, they have made a big deal of child sexual exploitation and so on, something that successive governments in this country at least have done nothing to deal with over the years. So this is the excuse that they're using to pursue a policy of removing people's freedoms, removing people's privacy protections, and this notion that criminals can be using encryption. Where are the criminals exactly? I suspect the criminals are mainly in the British and the United States governments at the moment.
I couldn't have put it better myself. We'll see later on that when very senior people in the intelligence agencies in Britain and America wish to communicate, they often do so now in the clear. Now, this might not only be for reasons of convenience, it might be because they know that there's actually spying going on them, as Mr. Binney often says, so that everyone who's senior in the structure has a hold over them.
Yes.
Can I just add a bit there? I noticed they use that wonderful expression, our collective response, again, and most people take that as being our joint response. I don't feel that. I think what they're doing is they are creating the collective. When they're talking about a collective response, they're actually creating a collective.
Now, Alex, the Independent today, far-right extremism to be included in official terror warnings alongside alongside Islamist threat for the first time, government announces.
Now, I first came across the phrase domestic extremism as something new being pushed to the intelligence agencies circa 2006. And it seems very recent indeed that the phrase has switched from domestic extremism, which was a catch-all term, to the phrase far-right extremism. But as Brian and you have been covering in recent weeks, the phrase really is as long as a piece of string. It could mean anything that the government doesn't like. But this is putting it right up at the terrorism end of the spectrum, because this is being taken into the remit now of JTAC, the Joint Threat Assessment Centre, which is housed at Thames House at MI5's headquarters, but it draws upon the other intelligence agencies. It's staffed by secondees from all of the intelligence agencies. And of course, they have been pressurized since shortly after 9/11 to first of all be set up and then produce these regular country reviews, and one for Britain as well, among the other countries of the world. And now we're being told that it's going to include so-called far-right extremism, but by its very nature, a lot of this is people talking about their discontent with the state of their nation. It's a very different kettle of fish from so-called Islamic extremism, which is almost invariably planning attacks, whether or not it's patsies involved in that talk.
You know, Alex, in a lot of the news that we cover, at the basis of everything that of a lot of the stuff that we cover are statistics. And one of the real problems when you start looking at statistics historically is, of course, the goalposts get moved, things get changed, the statistics are measured in different ways, and so you can't actually necessarily understand whether a claim which is made by a politician that a certain thing has happened in the past is true. And the question in my mind is there far-right extremism rising in this country, or is this simply a redefinition of something that was always there? In fact, a pretty unfair redefinition at that.
I strongly suspect the latter. There is perhaps a modest increase in the number of young adults or teenagers who are looking at fairly despicable content which verges on calling for race war, which wouldn't have happened before the internet. But the voicing of discontent with the path of the country, anyone of your age or my age knows, something that used to be voiced in pubs and now is voiced mainly online and is therefore capturable, recordable, and spinnable into statistics. I suspect it's the latter scenario that you put forward, Mike, and if so, that would be congruent with what we know about the Southern Poverty Law Center in the United States, which has really been blown wide open in the last year, that it by default, it inflates its statistics of hate incidents year on year so that it can call for more funding. And I suspect the same is true of the JTAC structure within Britain. I wouldn't blame the individual officers perhaps, but the structure as a whole is hungry for more resources. And how do you do that? You widen the statistical base so that you're not comparing like with like.
Indeed. Now, if we remember back to 2015 when Cameron was, or 2014 maybe, when Cameron was giving a speech to the United Nations General Assembly, and he was talking about the rise of far-right extremism, and he was including people that perhaps didn't believe the narrative, the official narrative on 9/11 or 7/7, for example. Well, let's just have a look at this. Also from The Independent, how moon landing conspiracy theories influenced the far right. And this article saying it may have marked one of the most important scientific and technological advances in history, but it also birthed a movement of thinkers whose distrust of government forces continues to shape our social and political landscape. Moon landing denial continues to permeate popular discourse, but these theories are now increasingly linked to far-right ideologies. In 2001, Fox News aired a documentary called Did We Land on the Moon? And in 2018, the University of Cambridge released its findings of the largest ever cross-national study conducted on conspiracy theories, and found a direct correlation between conspiracy theories and populist politics. So now populism is far right, conspiracies are far right, everything is being relabeled far right, and under those circumstances, if everything which isn't Jeremy Corbyn is far right, then clearly there is a rise in the far right.
Yes, if I can say something on that, Mike.
Yes.
The first rule of examining statistics in public service, I'm sure it was true in your financial past as well, is correlation is not equivalent to cause, right? You've got the same people who, whether sincerely or just for the hell of it, like to say, here, we never landed on the moon, did we? Those are the same kinds of inquiring minds, if you call it that positively, or if you want to be negative, you can say conspiratorially minded or pot stirrers, who then talk about the JFK assassination or flooding the country with immigrants or whatever it may be. So you're looking at a situation where people nodes, really, that the same kinds of people who look at one group of traffic look at the other. To go from that, I know that The Independent is the lowest quality national press. Well, it's not even press anymore; it's internet only. The lowest quality national so-called broadsheet publication. But the journalist who write this is at least pretending to believe that the study of, shall we say, far-right conspiracy theories is causing people to disbelieve the moon landings or vice versa. That's just very basic error of statistics.
Yes.
And I'll just add in here that that's one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got these security teams now looking at people like Trevor Colt, military veteran who's done a huge amount of work with military veterans. And we know that he's being put under huge pressure at the moment simply because, of course, he's challenging the government as to their lack of support for veterans. Now he's been invited into police stations and certain accusations have been made.
And forthcoming court cases and so on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we'll have more on that in due course. In the meantime, one of the efforts to control the narrative, of course, was the Democratic National Committee's lawsuit against WikiLeaks and Trump. Well, it appears to have been dismissed, with the judge saying that the publication of the emails from the DNC is plainly of the type entitled to the strongest protection that the First Amendment offers. So this judge has dismissed this lawsuit against Russia, WikiLeaks, Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and a range of campaign officials, including Roger Stone, for example, for their alleged role in the so-called email hack. He said that the primary wrongdoer in this alleged criminal enterprise is protected from being liable for crimes in the US courts. And that he's talking about Russia there. He also said that WikiLeaks, Assange, Roger Stone, George Papadopoulos also could not be held liable for distributing these leaked emails, or the so-called hacked emails. In fact, Bill Binney has demonstrated quite clearly that the emails weren't hacked. They were first copied onto a USB stick and they were sent on from there. So this entire court case has been dismissed. It's actually worthwhile getting the judgment and just reading through it, because the word dismissed appears many, many times. There were many allegations from the DNC on this and nothing has been held up in this court case. And very interesting. In the meantime, Alex, The Guardian reporting secret texts cast light on UK's early role in Trump-Russia inquiry. And the five nations meeting that we discussed earlier on, talking about the need to make sure that there's no election interference and election meddling from foreign countries. It wasn't Russia interfered in the US election in 2016, was it?
No, but in fairness to my old employer, I'm now beginning to think that it wasn't GCHQ on the British side either. I'm suspecting it was a few MI5 and MI6 officials. Now, Mr. Fleming has since been appointed the director of GCHQ when Robert Hannigan left in a hurry, just days after Mr. Trump took office, by the way, and possibly related, according to some. But Mr. Fleming is the first GCHQ director to have been appointed by the National Security Council under the full control of Mark Sedwill, or possibly that applies to his predecessor, but certainly these last two have been of the new mold and very different from previous GCHQ directors, very media savvy, image conscious. Mr. Fleming was still at Thames House, a senior at MI5 when these texts were sent to Andrew McCabe, the notorious senior of FBI. Now, MI5 is the equivalent agency to FBI in the American setup, that is domestic intelligence and particularly domestic human intelligence. But unlike the GCHQ NSA relationship, there is no formal treaty on that. GCHQ and NSA are parties or are the respective ends of the UK-USA treaty, not to spy on each other for signals intelligence and to share most signals intelligence. That does not apply to human intelligence. There is no Five Eyes relationship between MI5 and FBI. Of course, there are authorized channels between them. They should at least, in theory, have secure email and phone connectivity between them, possibly, and I know that this sometimes doesn't happen, they don't at senior directorate level, but from one desk to the other. But prima facie, this is actually very serious, that Mr. Fleming, as a deputy director at MI5, sent texts in the clear to Andrew McCabe saying, quote, "I see that members of our respective agencies have met on our strange situation." This was sent in August 2016 at the height of the Russiagate furore, and of course just 2 months before the election in the US. questions to answer, shall we say?
Well, yes. I mean, there are questions to answer. Where do you think this, or how do you read this leaving the US-UK relationship, special relationship? Because, of course, in the context of the Kim Darroch leaked cables and so on, there's a picture building here which is probably one that the British government at least doesn't want to become public.
Yes, it is going to be difficult for the special relationship to have the plug pulled completely on it. I think that particularly in terms of signals intelligence and many other kinds of areas of bilateral cooperation, the UK and US deep states and intelligence services will continue to have a link between them. But the classic channel of the special relationship has always been the diplomatic one. The Foreign Office, and particularly our ambassador in Washington, having privileged access to White House and Pentagon and State Department staff. That is the level, and of course the party apparatuses during the election cycle as well. That's the access which I think is on the danger of waning. So that effectively the US will have a tier of allies with whom it kind of tips a wink about its strategic planning, others being, for example, Japan or Israel, or these days Germany for that matter. And I don't think that Britain is going to be permitted at presidential level, at least while Mr. Trump's in the White House, to be the first among equals of allies in the way that it was in the past. So diplomatic or Prime Minister-President special relationship, I think that's actually on the way out now, the way that things are shaping up in Washington. The critical mass has been reached of people of different political shades in Washington with different roles who have understood that the British deep state is not there for good.
Okay, let's move on then. Thank you very much for that, Alex. If you like what the UK Column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where there are various options for doing that. And a brief reminder of AV 10.1 taking place on the 27th of October this year. Tickets going very fast for that. Details at alternativeview.co.uk.
And Boris providing lots of theatre, of course, so it's going very well indeed. More serious matters. This Friday, David Noakes is in Southwark Crown Court. That's for a hearing at 10 o'clock. This is more Proceeds of Crime Act. So the state now essentially trying to completely bankrupt him as a result of his efforts to do something about cancer with GCMAF. Have a look at the article on the UK Column website if you'd like more details. If you can possibly get to that court case to show him and demonstrate public support, that would be absolutely excellent. And we know that things are building because David sent us a little email this morning to say that he had the police at his door at 11:30 last night, two police bashing on my door for 5 minutes. They were trying to say they were worried about his safety, his welfare, sorry. Obviously, this was another intimidation exercise to disturb him before the court case on Friday. And this is the sort of thing that we saw go on when Melanie Shaw was down in Plymouth. So we're well aware of how the police do things when they want to put the pressure on. Now, more news. Lynn Thayer remains in HM Prison Bronzefield. She's currently on hunger strike and has been since she went into the prison. As a result of that, they've put her in her own cell, which might be a good thing in some ways. We'd like to say that cards and letters of support would be a big boost for her. So her prison number is A0305EK and the address is HMP Bronzefield, Woodthorpe Road, Ashford, TW15 3JW. And there's also been a recent appeal for Sabine McNeill. That was turned down. The hearing lasted just under half an hour. And the Defence Counsel, Tom Stevens, put down 3 grounds for appeal. 1, the defendant's age and infirmity. 2, a lack of previous convictions. 3, her remorse for upsetting people. The judges considered the appeal for 5 minutes and then dismissed it as totally without merit. You can freeze the screen and read a little bit more in that report.
But she's also in HMP Bronzefield.
Indeed, yes. So Sabine is also there in Bronzefield as well. It's evident now that anybody who's going near something which is to the benefit of communities, whether it's exposing child abuse or trying to deal with cancer, the state is going to be after you. This is absolutely sickening. ICSA released its Nottingham report today. BBC News picking up hundreds of children abused by predatory carers. But if you read the BBC article, they talk about sort of nastiness and a bit of violence towards the children. But of course, they're not talking about the real detail of the abuse. Somebody who was Melanie Shaw, she described rape and particularly vile abuse of children, and she's alleged murders of some of those children. She was simply refused testimony at the ICSA inquiry, and she's now in Rampton following over 19 months in solitary confinement in various prisons with brutal treatment. So that brings us really a little bit more into the reality of UK in 2019, Mike.
Absolutely. Alex, from Belgium here, is Belgium caring for the vulnerable?
So Le Figaro, one of the best French newspapers, is reporting on France's half French-speaking neighbour with the same legal system, Belgium. Belgium is often a proving ground for things that France wants to do itself. Belgium, like the Netherlands, has had a euthanasia law for some years. The two countries, Netherlands and Belgium, were also ahead of the pack on same-sex marriage. And it's in Belgium and the Netherlands now where sanctioned euthanasia is most mature, where the most doubts are being voiced. Now, why the French are reporting on this is because the whole country, France that is, has just been in uproar about the death of a man called Vincent Lambert, that's spelt like Vincent Lambert, if people want to look it up, who was killed by deliberate dehydration, which happened in a lot of British care homes, as Brian keeps reporting. And this was a deliberate withholding of water because he was severely mentally impaired and supposedly in a vegetative state, but there was no indication that he was suffering or had a wish to die. And this case was still, shall we say, warm. Mr. Lambert had just passed away when the French were saying, why can't we have a Belgian-style euthanasia law? So it's very timely that the European Court of Human Rights has now agreed to hear a case by a plaintiff who's taking his own country, Belgium, to court because neither he nor his mother was even informed about the decision to euthanize their mother. And the heart of the matter here is that the president, or chairman, one should say in English, of the Federal Belgian Commission, which checks and evaluates euthanasia, is a Dr. Wim Distelmans, who, as reported here, is none other than the doctor who euthanized Madame de Troyer, one of the ladies who was being complained about. So a clear conflict of interests. Doctors, euthanizing doctors, shall we say, investigating themselves. It's as if the BMA set up a pro-euthanasia club within its own ranks that had the doctors that carried out euthanasia and then also received the complaints. So it's quite a step forward that the ECHR is going to take this on. The ECHR has previously found in cases of assisted suicide against the UK in 2002 and various other countries more recently. It has a fairly good record on this, better than the ECJ, which is not competent here. So this remains to be seen. The upshot is that Belgium does not seem to have any safeguards in place for protecting the vulnerable.
Okay, and let's move over to L'Express this time, and France experimenting with no jury trials.
Yes, what's happened here is France in 1791, shortly after the revolution, introduced English-style juries, and they still use the word assizes, which England doesn't have anymore since the 70s, which is the most serious categories of Crown Court trials we'd now say in England and Wales. They still have juries for them, but first of all, in 1941, the French said, okay, we're going to have 3 professional judges and 9 jurors making up the 12 good men and true. So the 3 professional judges, this was decided during Nazi occupation, they're going to sit with the jury and tell them how to find. So that's a good way of negating juries without abolishing them. And then in the 1990s, a second step was taken, which is that the judge in the case, not one of the jurors, but the judge on the bench, can actually decide to change the charge in a case being heard by the jury. So if he decides that someone on trial for murder ought to be accused of manslaughter or GBH, or French equivalents thereof, he can do a switch on the charge. Now we have the third strike, which is that courts in 7 municipal areas or departments, as they call them in France, Calvados, Cher, Moselle, Réunion, Sainte-Maritime, Yvelines, and Ardennes. One of those, of course, is a French overseas territory. They're going to have a 3-year trial in which professional judges in a trio sitting without a jury can hear crimes punishable by up to 20 years imprisonment if found guilty. And the report here by L'Express notes that 60% of these newly non-jury trials are likely to be or estimated to be for sexual offences. Now, Georgia Pouliquen, of course, we recently supported. She's back in France. She has on her YouTube channel, Georgia Poulican, now put up her first English language video. And she points out there that this is an absolute offence against democracy and the rule of law, because it's getting rid of juries without actually abolishing them. And she's very concerned that what this is going to do is allow people to be accused of sex with under 16s, basically statutory rape, of not facing a jury.
Yes, okay. Any thoughts?
Well, just it fits the pattern that we are seeing spread out through UK, Europe. It's also happening in America, that it becomes more and more difficult to pin down people who are abusing children or who want to. So it seems to me that the policy for this is rather bigger than national policy.
Absolutely. Now, Alex, let's go over to Japan now. And Defence News here reporting that Japan wants to be an official F-35 partner, but the Pentagon plans to say no.
Yes, and on screen is Mr. Suzuki's letter, the Director General of the Japanese, well, they don't call it an MOD, they're not allowed to call it an MOD, but the Japanese Defense Procurement Chief, Director General Suzuki, sent a letter to the US, to the Pentagon, saying, basically, we would like to examine the terms and conditions applying, and if they suit us, then we would like to become an F-35 partner nation, at which the Pentagon took fright and said, sorry, applications closed 17 years ago to be eligible to be an F-35 partner nation. The Defence News article I'm citing here goes on to point out that there are actually two levels. There's a two-tier participation in the F-35. The top-tier members are called partners, which means that they can actually have a say in the Joint Programme Office. The second tier are mere customers, and this is the likes of Israel, South Korea, Belgium, and Japan. They're already on that track, but it could include expand to include Finland, Singapore, and other nations, basically non-NATO countries, possibly including Turkey if it's out on its ear soon. They're just going to buy and be told, you get this software, you pay for this software, upgrade, you can't have that area, that software, whatever it may be. Japan is wanting to be a top-tier ally, but that seems to be a bridge too far. I suspect that, as with the Germans, the problem is that they're very good engineers, perhaps the world's best, and they might actually discover too many flaws if they're let into the top-tier arrangement where they actually start planning the F-35's future.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did mention Turkey there. I think there's no chance. Turkey's already received first batch of equipment for the S-400 air defense system. There's no chance of them being brought back into this program. So perhaps there is a country needed for the F-35 program. So maybe it's a bit short-sighted of the United States to refuse.
That point is made in the Defence News article, that a slot has become vacant with Turkey's departure from it. But then they quote a former official, who still wants to be anonymous, saying that if Japan is made a partner nation, quote, you've opened Pandora's box, which might be, again, this embarrassment of America trying to work out which its most valued ally in the world is. Is it Britain? Is it Japan? Is it Israel? Is it Canada? Is it Germany? Is it something else?
Yes.
Okay, well, how do we jump from the F-35 to local government? The answer is really procurement and businesses and corporations. It's the fact that public service is disappearing out the window and everything is being privatised. Well, I'm going to say a big thank you to the lady who picked up on our report from a couple of days ago when we were talking about the change in management training in a local council to the UK column, that's South Hams District Council, and they were boasting that basically in the new management behavioural training, what was going to be important was not what the council did, but how they did it. And everybody was to be evaluated down to the tiniest detail on how they performed inside the council. Well, our viewer has sent us in some really excellent information. So here's some details on the arrival of the local authority controlled company business case. Now, this is something that's been drifted in over a number of years. I am local, I had never heard of this before, but this is really amazing stuff because basically we are seeing the total privatisation of a local authority and we're understanding why this is happening. So the first thing we notice is that in discussing the bringing in of the local authority controlled company business case, It says in the agenda here, Part 2 items which may be taken in the absence of the public and press on the grounds that exempt information is likely to be disclosed. And what you pick up on very quickly is that they did not want their discussions about what was happening with the council to be released to the public. And so we had a lot of secretive sessions. Now, this was part of the minutes somebody picked up. The leader presented a report that set out and commented on the findings of a detailed business case which had been prepared by PricewaterhouseCoopers at the request of members into the merits of establishing an authority-controlled company. The preparation of the business case followed the council's decision on 16th of February 2016 to establish an LACC project. Now, what did we see? The representatives from PricewaterhouseCoopers came in to brief everybody. We've got another document here, option appraisal for proposed setup of local authority controlled company, consultation draft. We've pleasure in enclosing a copy of our report, the report containing the findings from our review in relation to South Hams District Council and West Devon Borough Council. So both those two councils looking at this business opportunity. Well, where's this come from? Well, it's from Grant Thornton, UK, LLP. And you note in here again, there's another big confidentiality clause. This report is for the sole use of the councils. We stress that our report and other communications are confidential and prepared for the addressees only. So however you look at it, you see the setup of this was being done in a very secretive manner, and some very big powerful firms like Grant Thornton and Pricewaterhouse being brought in. Well, what can we tell you about it? I just need to bring this up on my screen as it's a little bit small, but this is part of the report, the Grant Thornton report, the executive summary. In simple terms, they're looking at the key features, governance, financial, people and tax for the existing council arrangement. And then they bring in the new option where we look at each of those segments, and they're putting across the business case for the council for adopting this new totally corporate system for the council. Now, there's too much to go through in the news, so I'm going to leave people to have a look at it. But what you will see is a clear shift from the council serving local people to the council becoming a full-blown business. But it gets worse, and it took one man to flag up the real dangers. This is Dr. John Green, South Devon Green. He's a South Devon Green Party district councillor. The need for the two councils to establish their business plan has been heralded as a solution to address the funding gap foreseen for the coming years. However, it appears that the need for the LACC is being driven from central government as part of the first wave in a drive to privatise the public sector and ensure that as many services as possible are run by the private sector. The rationale appears to be based on the belief that public sector pensions, terms and conditions are too generous, and that public sector workers are not sufficiently motivated to provide efficient services. But he goes on to say this: there is no doubt that an LACC established by South Hams District Council and West Devon Borough Council would attempt to undermine the integrity of other councils across the southwest of England and beyond. And by the government squeezing local councils by providing less funding, they will then look to a local LACC to deliver services at a lower cost, as they are providing staff on lower salaries, pensions and benefits. What's he getting at with this statement? He's warning that the local council itself, South Hams and the West Devon Borough Council, are saying once we assume this corporate status, we will go poaching business from other councils. So this is essentially turning councils in on each other. Alex, very quickly, because we're nearly out for time, but privatisation of borough councils, local authorities, privatisation of the NHS, privatisation of the Ministry of Defence. This is handing everything to the banks.
Yes, and the first time it was aired in this way is nearly 40 years ago, 1980, 1981, in the early years of the Thatcher administration. Sir Keith Joseph and a club around him were the first people to push that business was the way for government to go. Local authorities were then gutted, and that ideation of that idea has really hung around waiting to be fulfilled. I think it's unfinished business from nearly 40 years ago. And of course, the other person that was very much involved in those days was Oliver Letwin, at that stage still at NM Rothschild, who then came into the Conservative government. So it's been waiting in the wings for a long time.
Yeah.
Just one other point on this. Of course, the other thing that is guaranteed to happen as this agenda is pursued is that access to information under the Freedom of Information Act will become a lot harder. Now, this issue of whether private companies that are pursuing work on behalf of a public authority, that are doing the job of the public authority on the public authority's behalf, this issue of whether they are subject to the Freedom of Information Act has been ruled on by the Information Commissioner. But of course, unless you know that, unless you know that you're entitled to information under those circumstances, you know, a refusal, private companies are not subject, is something that most people will simply accept. You shouldn't. You should challenge it at every opportunity. Am I allowed to just mention Greta?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to mention Greta because Greta Thunberg, of course, the 16-year-old climate campaigner. Good news, she says, I'll be joining the UN Climate Action Summit in New York, COP25 in Santiago, and other events along the way. I've been offered a ride on the 60-foot racing boat, Melisa 2. We'll be sailing across the Atlantic Ocean from the UK to New York City in mid-August. So this is a boat which is a racing yacht, which is one of the crew is a member of Monaco's royal family, grandson of the late Prince Rainier III, and also Grace Kelly. So he has invited her to join him to head across the Atlantic on this. Her father and a filmmaker will go as well. But it was this little quote from her that interested me. I'm not saying that people should stop flying. I'm saying it needs to be easier to be climate neutral. And I noticed that it's not carbon neutral anymore. It's climate neutral now. So we're not limiting just carbon dioxide. We're now limiting many other things, I suspect.
Well, anything they want to flag up.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right.
We'll leave it there.
We'll leave it there. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to our audience today. If you're not already subscribing to UK Column, please consider taking out a subscription and/or making a donation. We can only do what we do with your financial support. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time on Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.